How can a sophisticated and costly machine be responsible for such a significant loss of life?
The world of aviation has given us incredible achievements, but also some of the most baffling and unsolved mysteries in modern history.
It's much easier to traverse the Atlantic Ocean now than it was a few years ago.
Over the years, airplanes have disappeared mysteriously. Unidentified objects have shown up in the sky, and baffling events have confused investigators. These are the 15 world's biggest aviation mysteries. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. Here is an extraordinary tale of survival, determination, and the unimaginable. In October 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, carrying 45 passengers, mostly rugby team members and some friends, crashed in the Andes Mountains. Heading towards Santiago, Chile, the airplane encountered severe weather and made a navigational mistake, hitting a mountain peak and crashing into a distant snowy valley. 12 people died instantly, while many others were seriously hurt. The travelers were left in freezing conditions at high altitude with little food and no rescue was visible. The survivors faced harsh conditions, but managed their scarce resources like chocolate and wine, and soon ran out. In a desperate move, they resorted to consuming the bodies of the dead to stay alive. Rescue efforts faced difficulties at first due to bad visibility and tough terrain. After 8 days, the search was stopped. The survivors didn't know the search had ended and continued to hope. They stayed close for warmth, made a temporary shelter, and tried to signal using mirrors and big SOS letters in the snow. After 61 days with no hope in sight, 2 of the survivors made a daring 10-day trek through the mountains to find help. And on December 20th of 1972, they encountered a shepherd who alerted the authorities. Rescuers then reached the crash site and brought the remaining survivors to safety, ending one of the most extraordinary survival stories of the modern day. The ordeal inspired many books and films, with the survivors openly discussing the tough choices they faced. It remains a remarkable example of human resilience and the will to survive in unimaginable situations. Lost Squadron P-38 Lightning fighter planes. During the summer of 1942, in the middle of the Second World War, a squadron of 6 P-38 Lightning fighter planes and 2 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers was traveling from the United States to Great Britain as part of what was known as Operation Bolero. They ran into trouble when the weather became very bad, and their fuel was so limited that they had to make emergency landings on the ice sheet of Greenland. The team was saved, but they abandoned the planes, which eventually got buried under snow and ice. When the plane was discovered decades later, scientists were astonished by the contents. The planes were trapped under hundreds of feet of ice. In 1992, the Greenland Expedition Society discovered and astonishingly retrieved one of the P-38 planes. The plane was found under 268 feet of ice and eventually brought back to the United States, where it was restored and is now able to fly again. More findings have been made in the region, and as technology simplifies the search, there are plans to retrieve more of the historic squadron from the ice in the future. Japan Airlines Flight 123. Back in August 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 started a regular domestic flight from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka's Itami Airport. But soon after departure, the plane suffered a disastrous structural breakdown. As a result, there was a sudden decompression which eventually caused the vertical tail and all hydraulic systems to fail. This made the plane almost impossible to control. That's definitely not a scenario anyone wishes for when flying. For the next 32 minutes, the flight crew attempted to manage the jet. It oscillated wildly in both altitude and direction, and despite their best efforts, they eventually crashed into a mountain approximately 100 kilometers from Tokyo. The crash took the lives of 520 people, and that made it the deadliest single aircraft accident in all of aviation history. Somehow, against all the odds, 4 passengers actually survived the initial crash and then managed to make it through until rescue teams arrived. Investigations would reveal that it had been caused by a faulty repair that had been performed 7 years earlier. Back in 1978, that same plane had experienced a tail strike incident, and it seems that Boeing technicians made some repairs that weren't done according to the approved procedures. This is what eventually led to the failure of the rear pressure bulkhead. This failure caused the rapid decompression and the loss of control of Flight 123, a real nightmare scenario that had been developing for more than 5 years and somehow remained unnoticed the whole time. Imagine coming across this aircraft many years after it disappeared. For some, that's exactly what occurred. They couldn't find much more than luggage covered in mold and bodies, but they did discover the flight recorder. For nearly 30 years, the fate of this aircraft has been a perplexing enigma that has driven people mad with curiosity, and the desire for answers was overwhelming. Yet, there was a significant issue. The impact was so catastrophic that the flight recorder was compromised, and when they tried to retrieve the data, it perpetually replayed an incomplete message saying, "It's real, and it's going to." What was the remainder of that message? What were they talking about? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Helios Airways Flight 522. Back in the summer of 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 was on a journey from an international airport in Cyprus to Prague, Czech Republic, with a planned stopover at Athens International Airport in Greece. Shortly after takeoff, the plane started losing cabin pressure, causing the crew and passengers to become incapacitated due to a lack of oxygen. This is when not enough oxygen reaches the body's tissues. The plane stayed on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and then crashed in Greece. All 121 people on board were lost. It turned out that the pressurization system on board had been mistakenly set to manual rather than automatic before the plane took off, and that setting had stopped the automatic regulation of cabin pressure as the aircraft descended. The flight crew had then failed to recognize and address the issue, and that had ended up with them all becoming incapacitated from the lack of oxygen. In the end, there were modifications to the aircraft pre-flight checks, but it demonstrates that even a minor mistake can be crucial in aviation. Varig Flight 820. On July the 11th, 1973, Varig Flight 820 was traveling from Rio de Janeiro's International Airport to Paris's Orly Airport. As the plane was approaching its destination, a fire started in one of the bathrooms at the back. This caused thick smoke to rapidly fill the cabin. The crew then initiated an emergency descent to land immediately at Orly. However, the thick smoke and significant system failure would force the pilots to perform an emergency landing on the belly of the plane in a field about 5 kilometers before reaching the runway. This ended in disaster, and they were very close. Out of the 134 people on the plane, only 11 survived, 10 of whom were crew members and 1 passenger. Most deaths would be caused by smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning before the plane even landed. Investigations showed that the fire started from a lit cigarette thrown into the toilet's trash can. How terrifying! The hijacking of Ethiopian Flight 961. In November 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was hijacked by 3 Ethiopian citizens seeking asylum on a trip from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to Nairobi, Kenya. The hijackers insisted the plane be flown to Australia, ignoring the crew's warnings about insufficient fuel for the long journey. That's far from where they initially intended to fly. Since the aircraft's fuel ran out, the captain tried to make an emergency landing in the Indian Ocean near the Comoros Islands. The plane crash-landed in shallow waters near Grande Comore Island and broke apart on impact. 125 out of the 175 passengers on board all died in the incident, including the hijackers themselves. The explosion of Air India Flight 182. In June of the year 1985, Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747 known as Emperor Kanishka, was traveling from Toronto to London when it exploded in the air near the coast of Ireland. It killed all 329 people on board. It was to be the deadliest terror attack in all of Canada's history. Extensive investigations into the tragedy would reveal that Sikh extremists had planted a bomb on the aircraft. This explosion was meant to be part of a coordinated operation targeting another Air India Flight 2. Another bomb went off early at Tokyo's Narita Airport, killing 2 baggage handlers. After that, an inquiry criticized the Canadian government for how they handled the threat. They didn't take decisive action against terrorism back then. And the government apologized publicly for its failings and mistreatment of victims' families. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. Anyone who has studied American history knows about Amelia Earhart, the female pilot who attempted to fly around the world.
It's much easier to traverse the Atlantic Ocean now than it was a few years ago.
In 1937, she vanished during an attempt to set a new world record by flying around the globe. After she and her navigator, Fred Noonan, took off from New Guinea in her Lockheed Electra, they aimed for Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean. This turned into one of the toughest parts of their trip, covering more than 2,500 miles over open sea. They had issues with communication and made mistakes in navigation during the flight. Earhart's final known radio message said they were running low on gas and having trouble finding the island. After one more message, all communication would be lost. Despite a thorough search, no sign of her, Noonan, or the aircraft was ever discovered. Numerous theories have appeared over the years regarding her vanishing, ranging from crashing into the ocean to landing on a deserted island and vanishing to begin a new life. Parts of the airplane wreckage have appeared from time to time, but none have ever been definitively connected to Earhart's aircraft. Her disappearance is still one of aviation's most intriguing, unsolved mysteries. Even now, people keep looking for Amelia Earhart. But what do you think became of her? Did she run away with Fred Noonan to start over? Did she vanish in the Bermuda Triangle? Or was it just a mistake of her own that caused her end? Make sure to tell me in the comments below. The disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 653. Back in December 1977, Malaysian Airlines System Flight 653 departed the international airport at 7:21 in the evening, heading to Kuala Lumpur Subang Airport. However, it did not arrive. At 7:54 in the evening, while descending towards Subang, the crew reported an unidentified hijacker on board. Then, communication would be interrupted, and the plane started flying to Singapore. In the audio recording captured by the cockpit recorder, it was clear there was a confrontation, which concluded with gunfire. That is never a good thing, especially when you are on an airplane. Investigators determined that both pilots were shot, and then the aircraft was left without control. At 8:36 in the evening, the plane crashed into a swamp near Malaysia, and all 100 people on board had died. There has been no real understanding of the identities and motives of the hijackers. There was some talk about the Japanese Red Army being involved, but no real proof ever came up to back those claims. Flight 19. A regular training mission by the United States Navy called Flight 19 disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean in December of the year 1945, and it seemed like the Bermuda Triangle had claimed another victim. 5 Avenger torpedo bombers with 14 crew members took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida for a 3-hour training exercise. However, shortly after takeoff, the lead pilot reported a compass malfunction and navigational confusion, causing the squadron to lose its way. As their disorientation worsened, the plane flew further into the Atlantic Ocean, leaving the pilots unable to figure out their location or their actions. Radio messages showed increasing confusion and fear as night came and fuel ran low. A rescue plane was sent, but it disappeared soon after taking off, probably because of an explosion in the air, and no traces were ever found. Despite a comprehensive search by the Navy, no debris or bodies were found. Some theories suggest magnetic disturbances, storms, and equipment failures, while others blame the mysterious reputation of the Bermuda Triangle. Throughout time, the Bermuda Triangle has been accused of causing the vanishing of aircraft, vessels, and various other occurrences. However, it is merely a region of the sea that continues to intrigue and mystify sailors and many others who consider it a captivating part of the world. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. Back in 1974, after leaving Paris on a flight from Istanbul to London, Turkish Airlines Flight 981 had a big problem when a rear cargo door came off because it wasn't closed right. This caused sudden decompression and a drop in cabin pressure, which made part of the cabin floor collapse. That severed all kinds of control cables and sent the aircraft spinning out of control. The plane then crashed into a forest near Paris, resulting in the deaths of all 346 people on board. Although it does seem like the case of checking that doors are shut properly, it did turn out that the design of the cargo door in question had a fatal flaw. It also happened on an American Airlines flight in 1972 and wasn't fixed. So now the authorities finally made changes to aircraft safety design protocols, hopefully making more sense about doors not swinging open randomly during flights. The disappearance of Glenn Miller. In 1944, during the Second World War, the well-known and very popular American bandleader Glenn Miller disappeared without a trace while flying from England to France. Miller was headed to entertain troops in Paris then. He boarded a single-engine UC-64 Norseman aircraft at RAF Twinwood Field in Bedfordshire, and the plane was last seen over the English Channel. And even though people have been searching for a long time, no wreckage has been found. This is one of the strangest mysteries in the history of aviation. The English Channel is not very large, and there was no clear reason for the crash. There are numerous theories, naturally, but it's most probable, considering it was wartime and the Channel was heavily involved in the conflict, that the plane was actually shot down, possibly by friendly fire, or perhaps it encountered trouble due to adverse weather. Nobody has ever been able to precisely determine what happened to Glenn Miller and the aircraft. Charles Nungesser's last flight. Back in 1927, flying was extremely dangerous. French aviators Charles Nungesser and Francois Colli attempted the first non-stop transatlantic flight from Paris to New York. It was very challenging because planes back then were not great, so maybe this one wasn't very mysterious. Their plane, a biplane called Whitebird, had taken off from an airfield near Paris. They had planned a route over the English Channel, southern England, and then Ireland before trying to fly across the huge Atlantic Ocean to New York. They were last seen over Ireland, but then seemed to disappear without a trace. Not intensely mysterious. Probably just ended up in the Atlantic, as there weren't really any other places they could have gone. Oddly, the pair disappeared just 2 weeks before Charles Lindbergh successfully completed a solo transatlantic flight.